Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Gannon. Today is Wednesday, June 19th, day 257. Day 257. Today is Juneteenth. You know, the significance of this day is about liberation. It's the Juneteenth, now a federal holiday here in the United States. Joe Biden made it so in 2021, but perhaps many people don't know the significance of the holiday. On this day in 1865, it was the day that all people living in the United States, including those who were formerly enslaved, were officially granted freedom. And Joe Biden passed a law to make it a federal holiday, acknowledging the liberation of slaves and all people. And that's our hope and our prayer, that all people, particularly those right now who are suffering bombardment in Gaza, anywhere where there's violence, our hope and prayer is that all people might be free. News in the past 24 hours, Reuters reported that the latest in terms of Gaza, the Israeli army announced that tanks have pushed into Western Rafah overnight last night. In relation to Israeli operations there, we've concluded that Israeli authorities are responsible for war crimes. That is from a report that the UN Human Rights Council published today. I have not read the report. I'm sure we're going to hear more about this in the news, but we're just starting to hear that the report does claim that Israeli military operations in Gaza have been responsible for war crimes, including extermination, murder, the use of starvation as a weapon, cruel and inhumane treatment, gender-based murder and violence, torture, forcible transfer. I'm certain as well Hamas was accused of potential war crimes as well. It's just that news is just coming out about that report now. The UN Environment Program estimated that the war in Gaza has destroyed over 60% of the infrastructure related to water, creating 40 million tons of building debris, which contains toxic materials. And the UN has said it's unable to distribute aid from the Israeli-controlled Kerem Shalom crossing because of lawlessness and panic among hungry people in the area. You'll remember the Rafah crossing has not had any aid brought in since the beginning of May. So we're going on 6+ weeks now from the Rafah crossing, and the Kerem Shalom has been the primary crossing where aid has been coming in by. And so unrest there has meant no aid could be distributed, despite Israel's daytime pause in military activity. What I'm about to share is not big news, but I'm inclined to say you heard it here first. We've been talking about this for weeks, but the New York Times finally reported that aid organizations operating in Gaza have said that the US-built Pier for aid distribution has failed, and it is likely to be dismantled weeks earlier than expected. In terms of Lebanon and Syria, Hezbollah's General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah said in a televised address that an invasion of Galilee, which is in Israel's north, remains on the table if the fighting escalates. He added that if Cyprus helps Israel in response to a speech by one of their officials, it will become part of the war. Hostilities have continued bilaterally between Israeli military and Hezbollah forces on the border between Lebanon and Israel. An IDF chief, Halevi, said that the military is aware of which asset Hezbollah used to film footage of Haifa's port after the group released a video yesterday claiming to have used a drone for the task. He said, "We're preparing and building solutions to deal with such capabilities as other capacities that in time will be deployed if needed." Reports in Lebanon said that Israel struck in the country's south, and Hezbollah later said that 3 of its members were killed. Syrian state media reported that a Syrian military officer was killed in a drone strike in some of their southern provinces and cited a military source. And then around 4 o'clock today, Eastern Standard Time, US CENTCOM announced that the US Central Command airstrike in Syria killed a senior ISIS official in an airstrike that was conducted in Syria. They said his name was Usama Jamal Mohammed Ibrahim al-Janabi, that he was killed. He was a senior ISIS official and facilitator. This was all over the news, certainly in the Middle East, at least in English news. His death will disrupt ISIS's ability to resource and conduct terror attacks, according to the US. They said, "We will continue to execute operations to degrade ISIS's operational capabilities and to ensure its enduring defeat." There's no indication any civilians were harmed in the strike, according to the US. I could not find any responses as of yet in Arab news sources. Other big news and political drama between the conversation in the United States and Israel. The White House canceled key strategic meetings between Israel and the United States related to Iran's nuclear capabilities. So the White House canceled these because of Netanyahu's video that he released yesterday. I talked about this in my update. He publicly criticized the Biden administration and accused the United States of delaying arms shipments to Israel. He said that the delay was inconceivable. Biden's special Mideast envoy, Amos Hochstein, told Netanyahu that he'd exaggerated and that Netanyahu had caused anger at the top levels of the Biden administration, according to Israeli news. A senior Israeli official said that Netanyahu's video also damaged weeks of coordination efforts and that U.S. officials described his conduct as, quote, ungratefulness. The National Unity Party leader, Benny Gantz, accused Netanyahu of damaging strategic relations with the U.S. for political reasons and creating simulated crises in a speech that he gave at Tel Aviv University. Today, Netanyahu said that our U.S. ambassador, Jack Lew, told him that the delayed shipments were in the process of being delivered to Israel. You know, my personal perspective and analysis is that Netanyahu didn't do the video because there were any delays or that the U.S. was withholding weapons in any way, shape, or form, but that Netanyahu knows he's going to get the weapons no matter what. So it doesn't matter if he pisses President Biden off or if he makes President Biden look really, really bad, but that this is totally a PR stunt. Netanyahu wants to help push Biden out of the White House because he wants Trump in the White House. And what are the consequences? Nothing. You know, the United States is not going to hold Netanyahu accountable. And so Netanyahu's politicizing, you know, the cancelization of the conversation about Iran is significant because Israel is on the precipice of a war with Hezbollah. You know, Iran supports Hezbollah. So Iran and Hezbollah are on Israel's doorstep. And so this is very dangerous politicking. But Netanyahu's a master at that. And President Biden's being walked all over. And there you go. And apparently the Israeli commentator, Alon Pincus, seems to agree with me. He says Netanyahu is playing politics. It's the only thing he knows how to do. The video is just a prequel to his visit to Washington, where he invited himself in cahoots with the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he will address a joint Congress on July 24th. He's doing so to hurt Biden and to turn Israel into a larger partisan wedge issue ahead of the U.S. presidential election on November 5th. He said it much more articulately than I. Haaretz describes the context in Israel as this, that I think is really significant. The war comes after 10 months of the most significant domestic political and social crisis in decades due to legislation promoted by the Netanyahu government aimed at dramatically weakening Israel's judiciary and potentially rescuing Netanyahu from the 3 corruption trials he faces. And amid the escalation of violence between West Bank Palestinians and Israeli settlers, the latter empowered by Israel's most right-wing government ever. The death toll in Gaza today is 37,396 Palestinians killed and 85,523 wounded since October 7th. Lord have mercy, and God be with all those held hostage and all those who are held in Israeli prisons unjustly. I want to give you just a picture of what that means in terms of those death toll numbers. More than 37,000 people is more than half of the deaths of American soldiers that were killed during the Vietnam War. The casualties in Vietnam was just over 58,000 people, and that war, Vietnam, lasted years and years and years. Some people say it lasted 10 to 20 years, so 37,000 people killed in Gaza, and they're not combatants. The vast majority are not. Now, even the Israeli army spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, is saying Hamas is an ideology and cannot be completely defeated. He said the idea of destroying Hamas is simply throwing sand in the eyes of the public. Hamas is an idea. This is the Israeli army spokesperson. He said, Hamas is an idea. It's a political party. Whoever thinks we can eliminate Hamas is mistaken. He said that on Israeli news today. Khaled Mahana is a lawyer representing a reporter for Al Arabi who was taken to the Sde Teiman prison facility. We've talked about this before in southern Israel. This is the one that is notoriously bad. The lawyer told the Qatari outlet that the conditions in the facility are catastrophic, and Israel is preventing human rights groups from examining it. He claimed detainees are being physically and sexually abused in the facility. And according to Al Arabi, Hanya is one of the first lawyers who's been allowed into the facility. The Israeli government notified the High Court of Justice it is acting to establish a mechanism of replacing visits by the International Committee of the Red Cross to Palestinian prisoners from the West Bank and Gaza who are being held by Israel. And I'm very sorry to say, and if you're sensitive, please don't listen to this. This is just a terrible thing for me to share, but one of the most horrific reports of anti-Semitism that I've heard. In Paris, it was reported that 2 minors were arrested on suspicion of gang raping and beating a 12-year-old Jewish girl in a suspected anti-Semitic attack in Paris on Saturday, today. The 2 boys, aged 13, were brought before a judge. They're being charged with rape. So this was last Saturday. They were placed in a detention center for minors. A 3rd teen is accused of having filmed the assault. Such heinous acts of violence against any human being, let alone, just any human being, must be deplored, opposed in the most ardent way possible. We have to live in a society that says those types of things are completely unacceptable, that provides protections that don't allow for the possibility of any such traumatic acts or violations and assaults to occur. Romans 12:9 says, abhor what is evil, and for a child to experience any violence, let alone that kind of savagery, is beyond atrocious and must be condemned. I don't have words. And the idea that the crime would be committed because she's Jewish is difficult to fathom. So we have to stand up ardently against anti-Semitism and loudly renounce evil acts of hatred and violence towards any human being that manifests itself in such horrific ways, just as we have to abhor the violence that has been going on and on and on and on and on for 257 days in Gaza. Frederick Douglass, the emancipated slave and famous abolitionist during the mid-1800s, is known for having said, "I prayed for freedom for 20 years, but I received no answer until I prayed with my legs." And I want to encourage you and myself to follow in his example as we work for the liberation of Palestinians, for the liberation of those in Gaza, for the liberation of Jewish people, Jews, Christians, Palestinians, Muslims, for all people, collective liberation, the end of oppression, violence, the war on Gaza, the genocide that's happening there, the release of all who are held in captivity in Israeli prisons, those who are being held hostage in Gaza. Might we pray for freedom in our hearts, but also with our legs, be it through Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages, prayer walks, or on journeys to the offices of our elected officials to say to end these atrocities now. But may we keep walking towards peace. Amen.